A girl in a wedding dress walks to her doom. Then a gunshot splits the air. Who's the scarred stranger? And what dark secret will unravel before the last shot rings out? The heat curled off the dry, cracked earth of dust veil. A forgotten town swallowed by the desert's endless sprawl. Shimmers rose from the ground, twisting the air like restless spirits over the dust-choked street. The sky stretched too wide, too blue. No clouds, no shade, no whisper of mercy for the chaos about to unfold. Hannah stood at the edge of it all, her hands shaking, fingers digging into the lace dress her stepmother had forced onto her that morning. It was tight, itchy, smelling of mothballs and old regrets. A fragile thing that pinched her skin and felt like a noose tightening around her neck, dragging her into a life she'd never wanted. Ahead, the church squatted like a weary relic, its wooden beams split and weathered, paint peeling off in ragged strips, steeple bent and jagged, stabbing up at a sky that offered no hope. Townsfolk gathered along the road, their boots scuffing the dirt, their eyes locked on her. Some hid under wide, sweat-stained hats, shielding their faces from the sun. Others stared openly, their gazes sharp with curiosity or quiet pity. Whispers drifted through the crowd like dry leaves skittering across the plain. She's just a kid, 16 at most. Slade's got daughters twice her age. Kane owed him a fortune. Guess she's the payment. Poor girl don't even look like she wants it. Hannah kept her eyes forward, trying to block out their voices. She didn't want to see their faces or dwell on the man beside her. Her father, Amos Kane, who hadn't touched her with kindness since she was a little girl. Now, he marched her forward, a gruff shadow, trading her life to wipe his slate clean. Head up, he muttered, his voice rough as broken stone, his eyes fixed somewhere distant. Ain't no man wants a wife who sulks like a whipped dog. She clenched her jaw, her throat dry as the dust clinging to her boots. Each step toward the church grew heavier, like the ground itself was clutching her ankles, pleading with her to stop. Her legs didn't feel like hers. The dress didn't feel like hers. The life waiting inside that crumbling building didn't belong to her either. Victor Slade stood at the altar, a hulking figure with fat hands folded over a belly that strained his patched vest. His lips twisted into a greasy smile, yellow teeth glinting beneath a drooping white mustache. 50, 60, maybe older, his skin was pale and sour, like milk left to curdle in the sun, his small, watery eyes sliding over her slow and deliberate. He looked at her like she was a prize steer, checking her frame, her face, her value. Hannah's stomach churned hard while burning the back of her throat. She swallowed it down, her hands tightening around the wildflower bouquet she held, the petals soft but starting to wilt in the heat. The pews creaked as a few dusty guests stood, worn-out farmers, a couple of Slade's rough hired men, all watching with blank faces. The minister hovered between her and Slade, sweat beading on his forehead, dripping into his stiff collar as he shifted nervously. Hannah caught her reflection in a cracked window pane, green eyes wide with dread, copper curls limp and tangled, face pale as a ghost. She didn't look like a bride. She looked like a prisoner marching to her cell. Life hadn't always been this small, this suffocating. There was a time when the world felt big and full of promise. Her mama used to call her a spitfire, always climbing trees with scraped knees, sketching wildflowers in the dirt with a twig, chasing rabbits barefoot across the prairie until dusk painted the sky pink. "You've got a wild soul, Hannah," Mama would say, her voice warm as a summer wind, brushing Hannah's curls back with gentle fingers. But Mama died when Hannah was 10, taken by a fever that swept through Dust Vale like a thief, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. After that, the light faded. Her father turned cold, his words sharp as thorns, his hands quick with a slap or a shove when she didn't move fast enough. Chores swallowed her days, scrubbing floors until her knuckles bled, mending shirts with shaky stitches, cooking meals he barely grunted at. The spark inside her dulled, buried under years of silence and survival. Then Joseph Peterson came into her life. She was 15 when he rode onto her father's land. A teen, lean, with skin browned by the sun and eyes that didn't leer like the other ranch hands. He'd been hired to fix a sagging fence, and she'd helped him, holding the wire steady while he hammered nails. He talked to her, really talked, about the stars glittering above, the wind whispering through the grass, the places he'd seen beyond Dust Vale's borders. Soon, there were stealing moments, laughing by the creek as the water sparkled, whispering under the night sky about dreams they barely dared to name. He made her feel seen, alive, like there was still something soft and good left in the world. She'd started to dream again, dreams of running away with him, of a life free from her father's shadow. But one night, Amos caught them sitting close under the stars, their shoulders brushing. He'd stormed out of the house, rifle in hand, and slammed the butt into Joseph's jaw, splitting his lip open. Then he'd beaten him until he crumpled in the dirt, blood pooling under the moonlight. "Get off my land," Amos had snarled, "or I'll bury you right here." The next morning, Joseph was gone. No note, no goodbye, just an empty space where he'd stood. Hannah had cried until her chest ached, until the tears dried up and left her hollow. Weeks stretched into months, then years. No word, no sign. She'd stopped waiting, stopped hoping. And now this. The bouquet in her hands felt heavier, the petals drooping like they knew the weight of her fate. She stepped into the church, and the air turned thick and still, pressing against her chest like it was alive, watching her every tremble. The minister cleared his throat, forcing a shaky smile that didn't reach his tired eyes. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." His words blurred into a dull hum, drowned out by the storm roaring in her ears. Her pulse pounded, throat, fingertips, spine, each beat loud and fast, shaking her from the inside. She felt sick, dizzy, like the walls were closing in. Her father shifted beside her, his shadow looming large and dark. "Don't mess this up, girl," he growled under his breath, his voice a warning. She stared at Slade's smug, sweaty face, his tobacco stench wafting toward her, his greedy eyes glinting. How many wives had he worn out before her? How many had he buried in unmarked graves? The questions clawed at her mind, sharp and relentless, but no answers came. The minister's voice broke through again, hesitant. "Do you, Hannah Kane, take Victor Slade to be your lawfully wedded—" "No," she whispered. The room froze, the air sucked out of it like a gasp. The minister blinked, fumbling over his words. I beg your pardon, miss?" "I said no," she repeated, lifting her chin. Her voice grew louder, stronger than she'd thought it could be, echoing off the splintered walls. "I won't do it." Her father's hand clamped on her arm, fingers digging in like iron, bruising her skin. "You'll do what you're told, girl," he hissed, his breath hot and sour against her ear. She yanked free, stumbling back, her chest heaving with every ragged breath. Anger surged through her, hot and wild, burning away the fear. "You'd sell your own daughter like a damn mule?" Amos's face flushed red, veins bulging in his neck, his eyes blazing. "You ungrateful little—" The church doors burst open with a thunderous crash that rattled the pews. Dust swirled in, thick and choking, stinging her eyes and catching her throat. A horse snorted outside, hooves stomping the dry earth restlessly. Every head turned, necks craning toward the sound. A figure swung down from the saddle, tall, lean, weathered by years of hard living. Hannah's breath caught, her heart slamming against her ribs. Joseph, older now, tougher, with dark hair longer and wilder than she remembered, a jagged scar slicing across his cheek like a mark of battles fought and won. He wore a frayed duster coat, dust clinging to its hem, and twin holsters hung low on his hips, guns glinting faintly in the dim light filtering through the broken windows. His eyes burned with something fierce, something alive and unyielding. "Step away from her," he growled, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade through rawhide. Gasps rippled through the pews, sharp and startled. Slade straightened, blinking like a hog caught in a lantern's glare, his fat fingers twitching. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice thick with confusion. "I'm the man she was meant to marry," Joseph said, drawing his revolver in one smooth, lightning-fast motion. The barrel locked on Slade's head, steady and unyielding, the click of the hammer loud in the stillness. Amos barked, "She's not yours to take, boy," his voice booming with fury. "She's not yours to give," Joseph snapped back, his tone cracking. Not with weakness, but with rage held tight, like a storm ready to break loose. Hannah stepped forward, her legs trembling but her spine straight as iron. "Joseph, I thought you were dead." "Not dead," he murmured, his eyes softening just for her, a flicker of the boy she'd known. "Just fighting to get back to you." The minister shuffled backward, hands raised high, his face drained of color, wanting no part of the fire unfolding before him. Slade sputtered, his fat fingers twitching toward the pistol at his hip, his face twisting with indignation. Joseph fired, a single, sharp shot that echoed like thunder. The gun flew from Slade's hand, skittering across the wooden floor with a metallic clatter, spinning into the shadows. A woman screamed, her voice high and piercing. A child started crying, soft whimpers cutting through the tension. Amos lunged forward, fists clenched, his face a mask of rage. "I'll see you hang for this, you bastard." "You tried that once," Joseph said, his tone cold as the desert night, his eyes narrowing. "Didn't work." He turned to Hannah, his voice urgent, cutting through the chaos. "We gotta go. Now." She stared at him, her mind racing like a runaway horse. Every rational thought screamed this was insanity. Joseph couldn't just ride in, pull a gun on a rich man like Slade, and ride off with her like some dime novel hero. The law would hunt them down. Her father would send men with rifles and ropes. Slade's wealth would buy every bounty hunter from here to the border. But another part of her, the part buried under years of silence, obedience, and despair, whispered, "This is your chance. Take it." She dropped the bouquet. The flowers hit the floor with a soft thud, petals scattering across the dusty boards like a final farewell to the life she'd almost been forced into. "I'm coming with you," she said, her voice steady, ringing with a strength she hadn't known she had. The church erupted into chaos, shouts bouncing off the walls, footsteps pounding, chairs scraping as people leaped to their feet. Joseph grabbed her hand, his grip warm and firm, and yanked her toward the door, his boots thudding against the floor. Outside, Slade's men were already moving. 5 of them, rough and hardened, drawing pistols from holsters with practiced ease. Bullets cracked through the air as they ran, splintering the doorframe into jagged shards, thudding into the walls with dull thumps. Joseph's horse stood waiting, lathered and snorting, its sides heaving from the hard ride into town. He vaulted into the saddle with a grunt and hauled Hannah up behind him, her arms wrapping tight around his waist, fingers digging into his coat. A shot grazed her shoulder. Pain flared hot and sudden, blood soaking the lace, trickling warm down her arm. She bit her lip hard, tasting copper, and held on tighter. He kicked the horse hard, and they tore off down the street, the animal's hooves pounding the dirt like a war drum. Townsfolk scattered, diving behind barrels and into doorways, their shouts swallowed by the rising dust. Bullets whizzed past. One clipped a sign above them, sending it swinging wildly with a creak. Another punched through a barrel, water gushing out in a frantic spray. A third buzzed close enough to ruffle her hair. Slade's men mounted their horses, shouting curses, their spurs jangling as they gave chase. The town blurred into a haze as they raced toward the canyon, the sun sinking low on the horizon, painting the world in streaks of molten gold and deep, furious red. The hoofbeats behind them grew louder, too close, closing in fast. Joseph veered sharp, cutting through a narrow alley between two sagging buildings, the horse's sides brushing the walls. A bullet ricocheted off the corner, spitting sparks. Hannah's heart hammered, her shoulder throbbing, her breath ragged against Joseph's back. They burst out into the open desert, the town shrinking behind them like a bad dream. The canyon loomed ahead, its jagged walls rising like sentinels. Slade's men were still behind. 3 now, the others lost in the dust, yelling, firing wild shots that kicked up sand around them. Joseph pushed the horse harder, weaving between rocks and scrub, the animal's breath coming in desperate snorts. A bullet struck the ground inches from the horse's hooves, making it stumble. Hannah tightened her grip, her nails digging into Joseph's ribs. "Hold on," he shouted over the wind, his voice taut. He turned sharp again, guiding them into a hidden trail, a narrow cut in the canyon wall she'd never have seen. The hoofbeats behind them faded, the shouts growing faint as they slipped into shadow. They didn't stop until they reached a small cave, tucked deep in the canyon's embrace, its mouth barely visible behind a tangle of dry brush. The horse slowed, trembling, its sides slick with sweat. Joseph slid down first, boots crunching on the gravel, then lifted her off, his hands steady on her hips despite the tension in his face. She winced as he checked her shoulder. Blood stained her dress, the lace torn and ragged, but the bullet had only grazed her, leaving a shallow, angry line. "You're okay," he said, his voice low, steadying her. "Just a scratch." She nodded, her chest tight, her breath still uneven. "I thought you left me, Joseph. For good this time." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers rough but gentle against her skin. "I tried to stay away, Hannah. Couldn't forget you. Not for one damn minute." She looked up at him, her green eyes fierce even in the dim light of the cave. A smile tugged at her lips, not soft, but sharp, alive, dangerous. "What now?" "We run," he said, his jaw tight. "Then we fight." She nodded, the fire in her chest flaring brighter. Whatever came next, Slade's men, her father's wrath, the law itself, she wasn't turning back. Not now, not ever. Night fell heavy over the cave, the darkness wrapping around them like a thick, quiet shroud. Hannah sat cross-legged by a small fire, its flames flickering low, casting long, shifting shadows across the rough sandstone walls. Her wedding dress was a ruin now, torn at the hem, streaked with dirt and blood, the lace hanging in tattered strips like a ghost of the day she'd escaped. She didn't care. The stars glittered outside, cold and distant, stretching over the desert like a map of silent, indifferent gods. Joseph crouched nearby, peeling back his sleeve to reveal a gash on his arm. Blood crusted along the edges, fresh from their wild ride out of Dust Vale. He winced as he touched it, the skin red and raw, then glanced at her with a faint, crooked grin. "You always did drag me into trouble." She didn't smile back, her face still tight with the day's weight. "I didn't ask you to come back." "Didn't come because you asked," he said, pulling a strip of cloth from his pack and wrapping it around his arm. "Came because I couldn't stay gone." Silence settled between them, heavy but alive, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the rustle of wind through the canyon's jagged edges. Hannah stared into the dark beyond the cave's mouth, her mind churning with memories and fears. "I thought you were dead, Joseph." After that night, I waited for weeks, stood by the window, watched the road. Then months. Then I stopped. Had to. He pulled out a needle, thread, and a small pouch of crushed herbs from his satchel, starting to clean his wound with careful hands. His fingers moved with a steady calm she didn't remember. Practice, sure, different from the boy who'd laughed with her by the creek. "Almost was," he said quietly, his voice low and rough. "Your father caught me after he ran me off, dragged me out past the ridge, tied me to a fence post, beat me till I couldn't see straight, broke my ribs, split my face open. Said if I ever came within 100 miles of Dust Vale, he'd finish it for good. Left me there, baking in the sun, buzzards circling overhead. Hannah's fingers tightened around the dented tin cup she held, water sloshing inside, her knuckles whitening. A Cherokee hunter found me, Koa. Took me in, patched me up when I was more dead than alive. Taught me how to shoot straight, ride hard, move quiet through country no white man dares touch. Saved my life. Gave me a new one I didn't waste. She watched him stitch his skin, the needle glinting in the firelight as it dipped in and out. He was harder now, scarred, leaner, his face sharper, not the soft-eyed boy who'd slipped her wildflowers through the barn door under the moonlight. "You've changed," she said, her voice steady but soft. "So have you," he replied, tying off the thread with a small grunt of pain, his eyes flicking to hers. They ate in silence, tough jerky that tasted like dust and old leather, chewy and bitter. She forced it down, her jaw aching, hunger winning over the sourness in her mouth. When the fire burned low to glowing embers, Joseph spread a blanket near the cave's edge, its edges frayed from years of use. "Sleep," he said, his tone firm. "I'll keep watch." "I can't sleep," she said, shaking her head, her curls brushing her shoulders. "Not after today." "You have to," he insisted, his voice softening just a little. "They'll come for us by morning, Slade's men, bounty hunters, maybe your father too. We need to be ready." She lay down, the blanket rough against her skin, her body sore from the ride, every muscle aching, her shoulder throbbing where the bullet had grazed her. Her mind wouldn't quiet. Flashes of the church, Slade's leer, the gunfire, Joseph's scarred face burned behind her eyes. She closed them to the sound of the wind whistling through the rocks and the faint crackle of the dying fire. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like a chain dragging her down. It felt like a breath, a pause before the fight ahead. Morning came quick, the sun slicing through the cave like a blade of light, hot and unforgiving. They were on the horse by dawn, pushing through narrow canyons and dry creek beds, avoiding open ridges where they'd be easy targets for a rifleman's keen eye. Joseph rode like he knew every twist of the land, cutting through hidden trails, dodging rocks and thorns Hannah would have missed, his hands steady on the reins. "You always know where you're going now?" she asked, her voice hoarse from the Ascoff dust coating her throat. "Most of the time," he said, flashing a quick, crooked grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Other times, I bluff and pray to whoever's listening." She let out a small laugh, surprised by how it felt, like shaking loose something long rusted shut inside her chest. They stopped at a rocky outcrop by midday, the heat rising in shimmering waves that blurred the horizon into a haze. A trickle of water seeped from the canyon wall into a shallow pool, barely enough to wet their hands. Hannah knelt, splashing her face, wiping away sweat and grime that stung her eyes and clung to her lashes. Her reflection stared back from the water, older, sharper, her green eyes harder, her jaw tighter. The girl in the pool wasn't the one who'd walked into that church. She was someone new, forged in the fire of the day before. "I killed a man once," Joseph said behind her, his voice low and sudden, cutting through the stillness. She froze, water dripping from her chin, her breath catching. "2 winters ago. He tried to take a kid from a camp Koa and I were traveling with. Thought he could sell her, make a quick buck. I shot him through the gut, watched him bleed out in the snow. Took a long time, too long. He begged at the end." She turned slowly, meeting his eyes, dark and steady. "Why tell me that now?" "Because I'm not the same man you knew," he said, his gaze unflinching. "Thought you deserved to know who's riding with you, who's got your back." She stepped closer, her voice firm, her boots crunching on the gravel. "Then I'll tell you something too. I dreamed of you every night for months after you left. Saw your face in the stars, heard your voice in the wind. Every morning, I woke up and remembered you were gone, and I was still there, trapped in that house under his roof. When my father told me I'd marry Slade, I waited for you one last time, stood by the window, watched the road till the sun set, until I couldn't anymore. I came as fast as I could, he said, his jaw tight, his hands clenching in a fist at his sides. Rode 300 miles through badlands and bounty posters, dodging bullets and lawmen to get here. I know, she whispered, her throat tight. I just had to stop hoping. It was the only way to keep breathing. He nodded once. Not an apology, but a quiet understanding that hung between them like smoke curling from a fire. By noon, the heat was brutal, pressing down like a heavy hand, the air thick and still. Hannah squinted at the horizon and saw them. Vultures, 3 black dots spiraling slow and lazy in the distance, their wings cutting through the sky. Trouble's close, Joseph said, his voice grim, his hand resting on his revolver. We need to move. But before they could mount up, a rifle shot cracked through the air, sharp and loud. A bullet struck the dirt 2 feet from her boot, kicking up a spray of dust that stung her legs. Down, Joseph yelled, yanking her behind a boulder, his arm strong around her waist. Another shot echoed, the bullet ricocheting off the rock with a high-pitched whine. They found us, he muttered, peering out from their cover, his eyes scanning the ridge above. One shooter, up there. Bounty hunter, probably. Lone bastard looking for a quick payout. Slade's money talks loud. What do we do? She asked, her heart slamming against her ribs, her hands trembling but gripping the boulder tight. I'll draw him out, he said, checking his revolver, spinning the cylinder with a click. You circle wide, get to that ravine over there. Stay low, move fast, don't look back. She grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve, her voice urgent. What if you don't come back? I will, he said, his eyes locking on hers, steady and sure. Go. He slipped into the brush like a shadow, quick, silent, lethal, disappearing into the tangle of thorns and rock. Hannah ran the other way, her boots sliding on loose gravel, thorns snagging her dress, tearing at her skin and drawing thin lines of blood. She ducked into the ravine, panting hard, her pulse roaring in her ears like a river in flood. Time stretched thin, every second a scream in her mind, every rustle of wind a threat. A shot rang out, sharp and loud, echoing off the canyon walls. Then another, closer this time. Then silence, heavy and suffocating. She waited, crouched behind a rock, counting breaths, 5 minutes that felt like 5 lifetimes. Her hands shook, her shoulder ached where the bullet had grazed her, the blood dried and sticky against her skin. Was he dead? Had they caught him? Was she alone again? Footsteps crunched in the distance, slow and deliberate. She held her breath, peering out, her fingers curling into fists. Then Joseph emerged from the brush, limping slightly, a fresh scrape on his cheek, blood staining his knife. He's done, he said, wiping the blade on his sleeve, his voice flat. Won't be sending word to anyone. She rushed to him, touching his arm, then hugged him hard, her face pressed against his chest, feeling the steady thud of his heart. I thought you were gone again, she whispered, her voice breaking. Don't, he said, holding her back, his arm strong around her, his voice rough but warm. You're still here. That's all that matters. They pressed on until sunset, the sky bleeding orange and purple behind the cliffs, the light fading into a bruised dusk. They found a deeper cave, cooler and shadowed, carved into the canyon's heart like a secret kept from the world. Hannah tore strips from her ruined dress to clean his wound, dried blood flaking off, the gash red, but not festering, the skin hot under her fingers. You used to hate blood, he said, watching her work, his voice soft with memory. Not anymore, she replied, tying the bandage tight, her hands steady despite the ache in her bones. He smiled faintly, a flicker of warmth in his eyes. You're different. So are you, she said, sitting back, brushing dirt from her hands, her gaze meeting his. We can't keep running, Joseph, she said, her voice firm, cutting through the quiet. Slade won't stop. My father won't either. They'll keep coming, more men, more guns. He nodded, leaning against the wall, his face hard in the firelight, shadows dancing across his scar. Then we stop running. We fight. Slade's got enemies, your father too. Folks in Dust Vale hate them. Ranchers he's cheated, women he's hurt, men he's paid off or threatened into silence. If we can get to them, show the truth, bribes, threats, all the rot they've spread, we can turn this around. Her eyes narrowed, sharp with thought, her mind racing. You think they'll believe me? A girl who ran from Slade, with bullet scars and a story to tell? They'll listen, and they'll fight, some for justice, some for revenge, but they'll fight. She smiled, a small, dangerous curve of her lips, her green eyes glinting in the firelight. Then let's make them pay, both of them, for everything. He leaned back, staring at the stars framed by the cave's mouth, their cold light spilling in. After tonight, we find allies. We bring this to him. Slade, your father, the whole damn town. We end it. She curled beside him, not from fear, but from something steadier, something growing inside her, a resolve as hard as the rock around them. Sleep came in fits, coyotes howling in the distance, their cries sharp against the night. At dawn, Joseph shook her awake, his hand gentle but firm on her shoulder. Time to ride. She sat up, eyes blurry but determined, rubbing the sleep from them. Where to? Grave Rock, he said, standing his silhouette tall against the cave's mouth. Outlaw town up north. Place for people with nowhere else to go. They've got nothing to lose, so they fight harder because of it. Think they'll help us? She asked, pulling her tangled hair back, her voice steady. If we give them a reason, he said, checking his revolver with a quick spin. They saddled up and rode into the wind, Hannah's back straight, her fear left behind with the ashes of that church and the bouquet she dropped in the dust. 3 days later, they reached Grave Rock, a rough sprawl of shacks and saloons crouched between two scorched hills like a wounded animal waiting to snap. The streets were crooked, uneven, the air thick with cigar smoke, the clatter of bottles, and the sharp laughter of men who lived on the edge. Eyes watched from shadowed doorways, hard, unblinking, sizing them up like prey or predators, depending on the moment. Hannah rode through the main road, dust streaked across her face, her revolver hanging heavy at her hip, its weight a comfort now. Joseph stayed close, blood crusted on his sleeve from the fight in the canyon, his gaze sharp as a hawk's, scanning every corner. They stopped outside a saloon called the Broken Fong, its sign creaking in the wind, the wood chipped and faded. Joseph tied the horse to a weathered post, his hands quick and sure. Sure about this? He asked, his voice low, his eyes flicking to hers. I'm not here to ask favors, she said, stepping down, her boots hitting the dirt with a soft thud. I'm here to offer vengeance, and a fight worth winning. He smirked, a faint curve of his lips. That might work better than gold in a place like this. She pushed through the swinging doors, and the room fell silent like a whip crack. Cards paused mid-deal, hands hovering over stained tables. A piano player's fingers dropped from the keys with a jarring clang, the note hanging in the air. Every outlaw, gambler, and gun hand turned to stare, the girl with fire in her eyes and a pistol on her belt standing like she owned the place. Hannah stepped into the center, her voice ringing clear, cutting through the haze of smoke and tension. I'm looking for anyone who knows Victor Slade. If he ever burned you, beat you, or buried someone you loved, I gotta fight for you. He tried to buy me, force me into his bed, chain me to his name. I said no, shot my way out with blood on my hands. Now I'm here to make sure he never does it again. Not to me, not to anyone. A heavy woman at the bar turned slowly, graying hair pulled tight into a bun, shoulders square, eyes like steel glinting in the dim light. I knew him, she said, her voice low and rough, carrying years of bitterness. Married me 10 years back. threw me out for a girl half my age, paid the sheriff to call me crazy, and locked me up in a cell till I stopped screaming. Another woman stood, scars trailing down her throat like jagged tears, her hands trembling with memory. He killed my sister, beat her till she stopped breathing, called it discipline. Town didn't lift a finger, said she deserved it. A third rose, young but hard-eyed, her fists clenched tight at her sides. He took my husband's land after a bad season, left us to starve. I buried my man last spring, dug the hole myself. One by one, others joined, 6 women in total, tough as nails, their hate still raw, their bones carrying years of grit and quiet fury. Joseph stepped beside her, his presence steady, his voice calm but firm. She's hitting Slade where it hurts, his money, his power, his name. She can't do it alone. She needs fighters. The piano started again, slow and haunting, its notes weaving through the room like a dirge. The women nodded, their eyes meeting hers with a shared spark. Mara, a young widow with a voice like iron and a shotgun resting against her chair, spoke up. Slade's got cash, men, and a crooked sheriff in his pocket. Bought half the town with dirty gold. How we take him? We hit all 3, Hannah said, her voice steady, her chin high. His wagons, his payroll, his lies. I want Dust Vale to see him for what he is, a snake with blood on his hands, before we burn his world to nothing but dust and ash. Plans came together fast, voices overlapping in the smoky air. Slade's convoy was due through Devil's Pass in 3 days, a narrow canyon of jagged rocks and tight turns. Perfect for an ambush if they could time it right. Hannah spent those nights restless, sleeping against cold stone, her thoughts racing like storm winds tearing through the desert. She dreamed of her mother, not a ghost, but a guide, her voice soft and fierce in the dark. You're wild, girl. Don't let them cage you. Break the bars, burn the locks. She woke with her heart pounding, her hands clenched, the words echoing in her bones. On the 3rd morning, she stood above the pass, rifle in hand, the canyon stretching below like a trap waiting to snap shut on its prey. The women were positioned on both ridges, Mara with her shotgun cocked, the scarred woman with a pistol steady in her grip, the others armed with rifles and resolve. Joseph crouched farther ahead, dynamite sticks tied to a loose boulder, his face set like stone, his hat pulled low against the rising sun. Hoofbeats echoed through the canyon, slow at first, then louder, a steady rumble that vibrated through the rocks. Slade's convoy rolled in, 3 wagons loaded with goods, canvas flapping in the wind, 2 guards per side, rifles slung loose in their saddles, their eyes lazy with overconfidence. Slade rode in the center under a canopy, dressed in a velvet vest that gleamed in the light, smug as a king, twisting a gold ring on his fat finger like it was a crown. Hannah's heart pounded, her palms sweaty on the rifle's grip, her breath shallow. She waited, watching, counting the seconds. Joseph gave the signal, a sharp whistle that cut through the morning stillness. The dynamite roared, a deafening blast that shook the ground. The boulder crashed down the cliffside, smashing the rear wagon into splinters and sealing the trail with a wall of rock and dust. Horses screamed, rearing wild, their hooves slashing the air. Men shouted, their voices swallowed by the chaos. Dust choking the canyon like a storm unleashed. Hannah raised her rifle and fired. The shot clipped a guard's shoulder, sending him sprawling with a yell, blood blooming on his shirt. Mara took the next, her shotgun blasting a man clean off his horse, his body hitting the ground with a dull thud. Gunfire erupted from both sides as Slade's men scattered, panic taking hold, their shots wild and desperate. Bullets pinged off rocks, whizzed through the air, kicking up dirt in frantic bursts. One grazed Hannah's arm, a hot sting that made her flinch, blood trickling down her sleeve. She gritted her teeth and kept firing, her hands steady despite the pain. Slade yelled something, his voice lost in the chaos, yanking his horse to flee, his face twisted with fear and rage. Joseph stepped into the path, rifle leveled, hat low over his eyes, his shadow long in the dust. "Hello again, Slade," he said, his voice calm, deadly. The old man's eyes widened, his face paling beneath the sweat and grime. You're dead," he stammered, his voice breaking. "Not yet," Joseph said, shooting the pistol from Slade's hand with a crack that echoed off the canyon walls. The gun spun away, useless, clattering against a rock. Hannah slid down the embankment, revolver drawn, her dress shredded, boots cracked, hair wild and tangled. She moved with the fury of every woman Slade had ever broken, her steps sure, her eyes blazing. "This is for them," she said, her voice steady as steel, cutting through the fading gunfire. "Every girl you bought, beat, or buried. Every life you crushed." Slade sneered, blood trickling from a split lip where he'd fallen, his hands shaking as he clutched his saddle. "Go on, kill me then. Be a killer like me. Stain your hands red." She aimed at his leg and fired, the shot precise, the bullet tearing through flesh and muscle. He screamed, collapsing in the dirt, clutching the wound as blood pooled beneath him, dark against the sand. "You'll live," she said coldly, her revolver still trained on him, her voice ice. "Long enough to see your name rot. Everything you built turn to ash." The fight was over fast. 5 minutes of bullets, blood, and chaos. Slade's men lay dead or fled, their bodies slumped in the dust, their horses scattered into the canyon shadows. The women stood over him, silent, breathless, their faces hard with victory, their weapons still warm. They stripped the wagons, letters spilling out, payroll ledgers with names and numbers, documents proving Slade's bribes to Dust Vale's sheriff, councilman, even a judge 2 towns over. Evidence of years of corruption tumbled into the dirt like poison laid bare. By nightfall, Hannah rode back into Dust Vale, Joseph and the women behind her, dust swirling in their wake like a storm rolling in. Townsfolk scattered as they approached, eyes wide, mouths gaping, some clutching their hats, others whispering behind their hands. She dismounted in the square outside the church, her boots hitting the ground with purpose, the sound sharp in the stillness. She nailed Slade's wanted poster to the door, the damning papers pinned beneath it. Proof of his crimes, her father's too, every lie and dirty deal exposed. "Your king's dead," she called to the stunned crowd, her voice ringing out, strong and unbroken. "And we ain't kneeling no more, not to him, not to anyone." Joseph stood beside her, quiet, steady, his hand resting on his holster, his eyes scanning the faces in the crowd, some shocked, some angry, a few nodding slow with understanding. "What now?" he asked, his voice low, meant just for her. She looked west, where the sky burned gold over the hills, the last light fading into a bruised dusk, the air cooling against her skin. "Now we build something new," she said, her chin high, her gaze steady. "One plank, one bullet, one free woman at a time. Something they can't take away." Behind them, the saloon doors swung open with a creak. The women stepped out. Mara, the scarred one, the widow, laughing, guns holstered, hair blowing wild in the wind, their voices carrying over the town like a promise of change. They'd fought and won, and the sound was a challenge to anyone who'd dare try to cage them again. Hannah turned one last time toward the church, her almost prison, her almost grave. The bouquet she dropped was long gone, trampled into the dust by the chaos of her escape. She walked away, her back straight, her steps sure, the weight of the revolver at her hip a reminder of the power she'd claimed. Slade crawled back to Dust Vale days later, leg festering, his empire crumbling around him like dry earth under a boot. The townsfolk turned on him. Ranchers he'd cheated stormed his house with pitchforks. Families he'd ruined shouted his name like a curse, all armed with the truth Hannah had brought to light. Amos Kane fled in the night, chased out by shouts and torches, his shadow vanishing into the desert. His name spat in the dirt like venom. The sheriff's badge hit the ground, abandoned by a man who knew his time was up, the metal glinting dully in the moonlight. Dust veil shifted, slowly, painfully, into something new. Hannah and Joseph stayed, not as fugitives hiding in the shadows, but as builders carving a life from the ashes of the old. They raised a small house on the edge of town, its walls rough but strong, its door open to those who'd fought beside them. The bride who'd rebelled became a legend, her story whispered around fires, carried on the wind that swept through the canyon. Hannah Kane, the girl who dropped her chains, picked up a gun, and made the world remember. She didn't kneel, not for her father's greed, not for Slade's cruelty, not for anyone who tried to break her. And it was over, finished. Right there in the dust where it began, the echoes of her stand rippling out, a call to anyone listening. Freedom wasn't given, it was taken, and she claimed hers with both hands.